not month for year.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz, and welcome to episode 24 of Not Once for Yes. It's our favourite time of the year again, and before you know it, it'll be Halloween. There is still a month to go though, so whilst you sip on your pumpkin spice lattes and wonder how long it'll be before the Christmas adverts start appearing on TV, let's share a few ghost stories and enjoy the spooky season.
Oh, it's a bit early for the C word, isn't it? So, Fitz, what have we got coming up on today's episode?
Coming up today on the Paranormal Radar, we have some creepy nursery rhymes and a haunted motorway, paranormal postcard from Louise in Australia, listener stories from Rissa, Natalie and Kat, and we visit Donington le Heath Manor, one of the oldest houses in Leicestershire, and we speak to Gill and Michelle of Haunted Heritage, who captured a rather interesting EVP at the site.
But before we get stuck into all of that, we want to say a big thank you to our latest patrons, Kelly
and Tony Lydon.
Thank you so much for your support, guys. And as ever, thank you to all of our patrons, old and new. We really couldn't do this show without you.
Now, first up, listener Adam Ring was asking in our Facebook group if we had had any stories from Australia. As luck would have it, we recently received a paranormal postcard from Louise in Australia. She writes, "Hello team Not Once for Yes, this one is coming all the way from Australia. After finding your awesome podcast just yesterday, I had to share with you a story and a situation. The situation affected my friends who lived in the house next door to my old house, and is not something I dealt with directly, although I would feel very uneasy when I went out into my backyard or was getting into my car on that side of the driveway, because I felt like someone or something was watching me. My neighbour's house was haunted by the spirit of a man who looked like a shadow person, and from what my friend said, he was a very unhappy ghost. He would apparently walk around the house and open the pantry several times a night. Once he threw a pair of nail scissors at my friend and even dropped a shampoo bottle on her head and knocked her out. She also said that once a clock flew off the wall and across the room. After they moved from this home, they moved to a house which was in between two cemeteries, and this put them in an interesting situation. When their daughter was 3, she started to talk to the different spirits from the two cemeteries, as well as my friend's grandparents. They've since moved, and I've not heard her mention anything of the spirits moving with them to the new house."
Well, thank you so much to Louise for sending us that paranormal postcard all the way from Australia. We love getting your paranormal postcards, so please do keep sending them in.
And what an interesting story. I can't believe she got knocked out.
I know.
I'm interested to see what was on the hospital report for that.
Indeed.
And again, another situation with children seeing things. I really want to know where this comes from.
But we do see it a lot.
Yeah, it happens time and time again. Anyway, moving on now to the Paranormal Radar, and I've got a couple of interesting stories for you. The first of which I think wouldn't be out of place in a horror film, though perhaps the first one to be ever set in Ipswich. Around 60 miles northeast of London, in the county of Suffolk, Ipswich is the oldest continuously inhabited town in England. With its port and strategic location, Ipswich has played an important role in the defence and commerce of the area since the Roman occupation in the 1st century. Having such seasoned history, one might expect to be hearing about the story of Roman, Saxon, Viking or Norman ghosts, and I'm sure that such encounters are to be had should one be in the right place at the right time. Our story, however, takes us to an industrial estate on the edge of town. A nearby resident has been frequently woken late at night by the eerie singing of a child. It began sporadically and increased in frequency, causing the poor mother of two to fear she was going insane. One night, she could take it no more and she called the local council, who sent out workers after midnight to investigate. Following the haunting sounds of a little girl singing the nursery rhyme, "It's raining, it's pouring," they were eventually able to track down the source to a nearby industrial building. Fortunately for the council workers and local residents, the singing was not caused by the disturbed spirit of a child. It was in fact part of the security system for the building. It was supposed to deter intrusions to the site and was connected to motion sensors around the building. It turns out that spiders were triggering the motion sensors during the night, and with the hustle and bustle of the daytime silenced, the sound was carrying to the nearby residential area. So sadly not a paranormal story, but I still recommend that you check out the recording made by one of the nearby residents. It is quite chilling, even knowing the source, and we'll put a link in the show notes on the website.
I can't even imagine how disturbing that must have been for the poor woman. I mean, it's bad enough when I get woken up in the night by next door's baby crying, because my brain, being me, interprets that as something creepy. But to hear a sinister nursery rhyme from across the industrial estate, nightmares. It would give me nightmares for years.
It really is sinister when you listen to it. Even after having read the article and I knew exactly what was going on, I was like, I don't like listening to this in the house on my own.
And if you don't know the nursery rhyme, and like all nursery rhymes, when you really read into the lyrics and think about it a bit, it is incredibly sinister. It goes something like this. It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring. He went to bed and bumped his head and didn't get up in the morning. And I can see a little glint in Fitz's eye that says he's going to put some awful creepy effects on this during mixing. But he went to bed and bumped his head and didn't get up in the morning. How sinister is that?
Yes, it does make me wonder sometimes about what people used to think was a reasonable topic for children's nursery rhymes.
Especially when they were often used to sing them to sleep.
Moving on, Our second story takes us to the M6 motorway in Cheshire, and for our American listeners, the motorway is akin to an interstate or freeway. I originally saw this story in the Cheshire Star, but when one of our wonderful listeners shared the headline on our Facebook group, I realised that it had hit many, if not all, of the national newspapers. International psychic Mike Brooker has dubbed the stretch of the M6 between junctions 16 to 19 in Cheshire as Cheshire's Bermuda Triangle due to the number of accidents that occur there, and that he believes can be attributed to the paranormal. Whilst I'm not entirely sure about the title of Bermuda Triangle, not being anywhere near Bermuda or in fact triangular, looking into this a little further, it does appear that the M6, and this stretch of it in particular, does have more accidents than you might otherwise expect. As motorway driving is generally safer than on other roads, the M6 doesn't even break the top 10 of the UK's most dangerous roads, but it does appear to be the most accident-prone motorway. Mike is of the opinion that there is a supernatural cause for these incidents, and that it likely has something to do with either a Roman burial site that was disturbed by the development of the motorway, a clash between English and Scottish armies that took place there, or his personal favourite, that it has something to do with the Saxons. Whilst he admits that he's got no evidence to substantiate these claims, he does intend to carry out an investigation.
Now, after doing a bit of digging, it turns out that there is more to this story, and we discovered some pretty interesting stuff. But before we get to that, in a surprise turn of events, I'm going to have to dust off my slightly moth-eaten, lesser spotted skeptic hat, just briefly. But there was something that bothered me about this story, and it was where it came from. I'd seen the name of the international medium.
I can't help but think of Austin Powers and the International Man of Mystery. What is so international about this? Is he specific in that all other psychic mediums are location-based and he's the only international? I don't get it.
Who knows? but I'd seen his name crop up before in a different news story published mere days after the Cheshire Bermuda Triangle one, this time about a haunted train line. He claimed that excavations for Crossrail 2, a proposed rail route in southeast England, would result in the rail line being haunted when it eventually opens because of spirits being disturbed by the building works. So I don't disagree in principle. It's quite common to hear that paranormal activity has been stirred up by excavations, building work or renovations. But he does admit in the article that no paranormal activity has actually happened yet. But he still made the effort to go to the papers just to say it probably will. I mean, maybe he knows something that we don't, but I just can't quite work out in my head why he would do that.
Now I'm going to don my greater spotted skeptic hat. He's making a testable prediction.
Okay, go on.
If we're going to follow the scientific method, you make a prediction which you can test to, basically try and track down whether your idea is true or not.
Yes.
So I'm going to say fair enough on this instance. He's saying, right, if you do this, this will happen because of my hypothesis. So it's a bit of evidence. If it does then become haunted, you can say, okay, in this instance, your hypothesis was correct. How can we test it further and narrow down to a...
Okay, well, that's a different take on it that I hadn't... Fair play, I say. Fair play. Well, interestingly enough, further on in this article, he sheds a little more light on the M6 story, saying that he thinks that the sightings have increased because of the upgrade work currently taking place on the motorway. He says that witnesses driving along this stretch have seen people standing at the side of the road, only to look back and they're gone, and that drivers hear the sounds of clanking metal, can smell offal or burning wool, and, I quote, hear the sounds of noise.
Not the sounds of noise.
I know. Terrifying, those sounds of noise.
Oh, they keep me up at night.
But for me, the interesting part of this story is how the M6 got its title of the most haunted road in Britain, which was referenced in a lot of these newspaper articles. The title came from a survey to discover the spookiest road in the country and was organised by the road building company Tarmac back in 2006, who asked drivers to send in their accounts of paranormal encounters on the roads of Britain. According to a spokesperson for the company, after the results of the survey were released, it seems they were pretty surprised to have received more accounts of paranormal sightings from the M6 than any other road, having expected the title of most haunted to go to a small, dark lane near an ancient battlefield.
So, despite being a bit sceptical about our dear old international psychic, it turns out there is a very good reason for the M6 being given the title the most haunted road in Britain. And we managed to dig up some of the very compelling ghost stories which earned it the title. A lady from Warwickshire reported that one Christmas, she was travelling home on the M6 toll road after visiting family, her husband and son asleep in the car while she took the wheel. The dark stretch of road was quiet and empty, and they were the only ones travelling this late, so she was able to use the full beam of her car's headlamps to light the way. Suddenly, the headlamps illuminated what she at first took to be animals crossing the road. Surprised, she braked to avoid them, and as the car slowed, she realised that it was actually a group of around 20 men, dressed in what looked to be Roman costume, and appearing to be carrying something on their shoulders. In her report, she explains that the men looked rather indistinct, and more like shadows than men, but she clearly remembered that they had no visible legs, and they were just walking through the tarmac as one would walk through water. She said nothing impeded their progress, not the barrier or the car that was travelling north. Needless to say, the family didn't believe me, but I know what I saw.
Another story came from a lady who was driving along the M6 late one summer's night to visit friends in the Lake District. In the darkness ahead, she thought she saw something up ahead on the hard shoulder. A broken down car, perhaps. She slowed the car, and as she did so, realised that what she was seeing was a woman in some sort of old-fashioned dress. In her report, she describes the detail being fairly indistinct, except that the woman was floating and didn't appear to have any feet. The apparition appeared to be staring searchingly into the distance. As the car passed by, the witness looked back, fascinated, in her rearview mirror. But the ghostly woman had disappeared. The report concludes with the witness explaining that she didn't find the encounter frightening, but rather felt sorry for the apparition.
Another account, this time by a man from Knutsford, reports how he was driving home along the M6 one night alone, when in the distance, he spotted a dense patch of mist on the road ahead. As he neared it, he noticed that it was getting bigger and taking on a distinct shape. At first, it seemed to be forming into the shape of what looked like a huge train. He blinked to clear his vision, but it was still there, only now it was closer still. He was shocked to see what appeared to be a lorry coming straight towards him on the wrong side of the road. He described it as looking very realistic, not at all like a vague shape in the mist, but a bright glowing white HGV. He looked in his rearview mirror, wondering if the other drivers could see it too, but the only other traffic was far behind him, their headlamps mere dots of light in the distance. He expected it to disappear, but it didn't. In fact, by now it was careering terrifyingly towards him, driving the wrong way down the same lane of the dark motorway. It was so frighteningly real that he pulled out of the way into the slow lane, wincing as the phantom lorry rushed by him, feeling as though the force of the passing vehicle might just rip off the side of his car. When it had passed, sweating with terror, his hands slick on the steering wheel, he immediately looked after the truck in his rearview mirror, but there was absolutely nothing. The phantom lorry had completely disappeared in the blink of an eye.
So could there be any truth to these stories about Roman remains being disturbed? Well, almost certainly. Lots of Britain's roads and settlements intersect with Roman ones, and quite a few of our roads still follow sections of Roman roads. As for the M6, it was built in the 50s, so I couldn't get to any archaeological reports from the original build between junctions 16 and 20, if indeed there were any done. But I was able to find archaeological reports from a road widening specifically between junctions 16 to 20 of the M6 that took place in 1994. And amongst the finds noted were, in fact, a Roman road and Roman artefact scatter. But just as interesting to me, because I'm a bit of a history nerd, was that they also found a medieval hall, an Iron Age settlement, and a Bronze Age spearhead. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yes, it is interesting that there's quite as much there, although I suppose it does make sense that the newer roads followed the path of the old ones, even if they do go back as far as the Romans. And with so much history, it doesn't surprise me then that we have so many tales of haunted roads.
Yes, and in fact, I do have a short but quite strange motorway story of my own. This was a few years ago now, and I believe we were driving back from Nottingham, so I think it was probably the M1. We'd been to a gig, so this was pretty late, for sure after midnight, so there was very little other traffic on the road. But looking out of the left-hand side window, I just spotted this child running down the side of the motorway on the hard shoulder. And bear in mind, there's nothing around on the M1. There's no houses, it's not residential. You might get the odd services, but this wasn't a stretch that had services anywhere near. And this child was maybe 7 or 8, a young child, far too young to be out after midnight and really having no reason to be anywhere near a motorway. So, of course, I said out loud to the rest of the car, what on earth is that child doing running down the side of the motorway at this time of night? At which point, everybody said, what child? We shot past it because obviously driving down the motorway, you're going at a reasonable speed. So it didn't take long to overtake a running child. And I could still see this child, but nobody else saw it. Now, I'd expect the driver maybe not to see it because obviously they're focused on the road, they're concentrating on driving. But I'm pretty sure the other passengers in the car had plenty of time to look over when I exclaimed and see this child. So obviously that freaked all of the passengers out because they couldn't understand what I was seeing.
That's really strange. Are they particularly unobservant friends, or?
I don't think so, but it has flummoxed me to this day as to whether it was something paranormal or whether we went by so quickly that they didn't see it. However, still, I'm left with a question. What on earth would an 8-year-old child be doing running down the side of the motorway? Even if it was a real child, why would they be there? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that is weird. You know, we've all been threatened with that. If you don't stop acting up, then we'll kick you out the car. But
I think that's just you.
They did it to me once as well.
I know.
For any listeners that are worried that I was abused as a child, they literally just went round the roundabout at the top of the road and came back again. It was fine. I was pretty much within sight the whole time.
And you learnt your lesson.
No, I didn't.
No.
Well, we shall move on now to our first listener story, and this one is from Rissa.
I live in a house built in the 50s in St. Louis, Missouri with my partner, Brandon. We've lived in this house for about 8 years. Around 5 or 6 years ago, we lived with a roommate. We'll call her M. M lived with us for about a year and a half. About a week before M moved in with us, I had a sleep paralysis experience, which I'd never had before and have not had since. I was reading in bed and some movement caught my eye. I looked up to see a large silhouette of a man. And it looked like he was covered in sticks and leaves, almost like a ghillie suit. He said, "Hello, Marissa," in a very creepy voice, as if he was announcing his presence into our home. This was also strange because while my name is Marissa, I go by Rissa. No one calls me Marissa, even my parents. And while this is happening, I'm experiencing paralysis until somehow I managed to take a deep breath and then he disappeared. So then M moved in. In that first week she lived with us, all the pictures that were hanging in the living room fell off the wall at different times. To my knowledge, there was no seismic activity. And besides, if that were the case, why would it only affect one room? Then we started noticing unexplained sounds. In one instance, Em and I were alone in the house and in the basement watching TV when we heard something very large and heavy slide across the floor above us. The sliding noise ended with a small tinkling sound, which to me sounded like someone had shaken our Christmas tree and the ornaments were clinking against each other. We went upstairs, but could not figure out what had happened. Another time, Em, her partner, myself and Brandon were again in the basement when we distinctly heard the knob on the door to the utility room turn and the door open. This particular door was a bit sticky and took some force to open. We kept that door closed to keep my cat away from Em's rabbits. I know I made sure that it was fully closed every time I used it, but we would often find it open about 2 inches. Then the really weird stuff started happening. Em's partner was in the basement one night, and Em was in the shower. He said he heard a man's voice call Em's name through the door at her. I was at work, and Brandon was asleep. Another time, Em's partner was sleeping over one night. He said he woke up in the middle of the night to see Em standing in the middle of the room, just staring. He rolled over and saw that she was sleeping in the bed next to him. Yet another time, I was sitting in my bedroom and I saw Em cross my doorway and walk down the hall towards the kitchen. I got up and followed her to tell her something, but when I got there, she wasn't there. She was sitting in her bedroom. We hadn't experienced anything in that house before Em moved in. She also had never experienced anything before she moved in. Fast forward to this year. Em is living in a different house, in a different city, and has a different partner now. She told me her partner woke up one night because he heard her murmuring. He looked over and saw her leaning over the bed talking to herself, as if she was looking for something she'd dropped. He rolled over to turn on the light, and when he looked back, she was in bed, fully asleep, wearing different clothes. We still live in the same house in St. Louis, and hadn't had any experiences since Em moved out, until very recently. I was in bed trying to fall asleep. I had an early morning ahead, so I was frustrated that I couldn't sleep. I was lying on my stomach when suddenly I felt someone enter the room. It felt to me like a young male presence, but I didn't turn to look. I just squeezed my eyes shut and thought, come on, not tonight. I've got to get some sleep. I want to communicate, but you can't come in here and wake me up when I have to get up early tomorrow. Then whatever it was, lightly touched my ear and then withdrew, and it was gone.
Thank you, Rissa, for sharing that story. Do you know, this reminds me so much of our haunted house.
Yeah, when she was describing things moving upstairs and sounding like somebody had shoved a heavy box across, that was exactly the kind of thing that we used to hear.
Yeah, and people hearing their names called.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to mention. I had exactly the same experience. I think we may have talked about this before, but as you all know, everybody calls me Lil. Nobody, even my parents, call me by my full name, Alicia. But when we were at that house, that is an experience that I had. Somebody saying quite loudly in my ear, right in my ear, my full name, which just nobody uses.
No, really strange. It really is such a parallel to our experiences. And it really does seem that your friend Em she's got something going on.
Maybe a catalyst. It doesn't sound like she had any experiences before. So is it a case of just getting a perfect storm that we sometimes talk about, this combination of people and location that just comes together to stir something up?
Yeah, it's really weird that it's her, though. It's not something else. Like her partner is seeing her do something and then looking over and, oh, God, that's not her.
So you've got like a doppelganger element to it as well. The plot thickens.
Indeed. And if you'd like to hear more from Rissa, incidentally, she's starting her own paranormal podcast called The Creepy Club. It was launched on the 25th of September, so please do go and check it out on your favourite podcast provider.
Well, for our next story of the episode, I'm afraid you've got to listen to me speaking again.
I'm not trying to be lazy, but we do have a distinct lack of gentlemen's ghost stories.
Indeed. So if you are a gentleman and you happen to have a ghost story, please do get in touch and send it in to give my voice a little break.
So it's back to Lil with our next listener story, and this one is from Natalie.
I'm from Rugby in Warwickshire, a town created by the railways in the 1800s and famous for creating rugby the game. I've always had odd feelings now and again. Weird situations have happened, but I'm a scientific person. A door closing on its own is probably a draft, but things keep happening that cannot be explained. I'm the youngest of 3. My parents separated, and I lived with my father, brother, and sister. We lived in one of the first houses built for the railways, about 100 or so years old. We'd hear strange noises at night. When I used to have the middle room, I could always hear someone moving about in the attic. As we lived in the middle of a row of 5 houses, I thought it was our neighbour moving about at night around 11 p.m. As you can imagine, it was very annoying. In fact, I eventually got so annoyed with this that I complained to my dad about the noise. I was about 13 at the time. I explained that I could hear the neighbour in the attic moving about and that it sounded like he was right above my bedroom. The noises were like footsteps, constantly moving around, and sometimes I could hear a chair being moved. I felt at times like I was being watched, but I just assumed I was being paranoid. My father explained that it would be impossible to hear the neighbour in his attic because between our 2 houses is a chimney and it runs straight through the attic. We wouldn't be able to hear the next door neighbours, even if we wanted to. So I assumed it was the other neighbours, but my father said it couldn't be them either. They didn't have any flooring in their attic, and there was nothing up there but insulation. He knew this because he built a wall in the attic to separate the 2 houses. I shrugged this off, believing my father, thinking that it's just an old house settling, or noise in the chimney breast that was in my bedroom. But it kept happening, and it freaked me out. Sometimes there was a cold spell in my bedroom that would just vanish not long after. Eventually, the noises stopped when my dad converted the attic into a bedroom for himself. Over time, I'd grown used to the noises and never really noticed them. Except for one time, I was lying in bed reading. My cat was curled up on the bed. She slept with me every night. One morning, she stopped licking herself and went rigid. I paused my reading, glancing at her, wondering why she was being weird. She was staring over my shoulder, eyes wide and alert, clearly uncomfortable. I froze, my heart pounding. My naive self panicked, thinking it was a spider. I turned around. Nothing. There was nothing behind me. Of course, I was freaked. She wouldn't stop staring at the wall. I stroked her, feeling unusually cold. She turned her head slightly as if tracking something, then resumed licking herself. Needless to say, I got up. Still to this day, I get a shiver and can never forget her face. Sometimes when you were alone in the house, you would hear someone upstairs, a floorboard move, something being placed in the cupboard. My father used to think I was in at those times because he heard a noise in my bedroom. He would act surprised when I returned home from being out. Eventually, I moved rooms to the large room. I would sit in my room watching TV and think I heard somebody shouting my name. I would pause the film to shout back in reply, only to find there was no one else home. I brushed it off, thinking again, it must be the neighbours. When we used to take the dog for a walk, we lived near the cemetery, and there used to be an old train track that ran past it. It's no longer a working track, but you can walk along the old route the trains would have taken. Sometimes at home, I could hear the steam whistle of the trains in the distance. When we walked the dog, you could hear the whistle of the trains at night. Walking around the cemetery, you never felt alone.
And thank you to Natalie for sharing that story with us. She did actually send us another one, but we're going to save that for another episode. Now, again, we've got the situation, names being called, noises upstairs, dragging chairs.
So similar.
So similar.
Except the whistle of the steam trains, that's really fascinating. In fact, it's something I've often wondered why we don't hear more in our area where we live, because there are a lot of disused railway lines around our area.
Yes, maybe we should pay them a visit for a nighttime walk with a digital recorder.
Oh, I like your thinking. That's a good idea.
Let's do it.
Yes.
Coming up, we're going to be telling you about our visit to Donington le Heath Manor. But first, we've got our last listener story. This one comes to us from sunny Florida and is from Kat.
I've had more than my fair share of ghostly experiences, but I thought I would share one of my most profound ones. Several years ago, I was dating a guy who insisted the home he shared with his parents was haunted. It's not that I didn't believe him, since I lived in a house with a resident ghost as well. But I was not prepared for the level of the haunting. The home was previously owned by his grandfather and was left to his family after his grandfather died. It's an older home for my part of the world, built in 1920. Its design is known as shotgun style, meaning that you can see from the front room all the way through to the back of the house. One evening, after a night in watching the telly, we fell asleep on his front room couch. Around 3 a.m, a noise very close to my ear jarred me from a deep sleep. I moved myself into a more upright position so I could see into the dining room. While trying to figure out what the noise was, I noticed that the dining room had an eerie reddish glow. Then I saw a man standing behind the dining room table. At first, I thought it was my former boyfriend's dad. It looked just like him. Then I realised that I could see through the person I was seeing. That's when I elbowed my ex and woke him up. He saw what I saw and said, "Dad?" Then it dawned on him that it was an apparition. It just stood there for a few minutes, and the reddish hue remained, but the apparition just sort of dissolved. At that point, we turned on the lights, gathered some overnight things for him, and headed to my haunted house to sleep for the rest of the night. At least my ghost wasn't a creepy see-through one.
And thank you to Kat for sharing that story with us. Now, there was one thing that I really wanted to know when I heard Kat's story, because she was at her boyfriend's house and they both saw what they thought was his father.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know whether his father was still alive.
Yeah.
And two, if he was, what he thought about it. It turns out he was indeed still alive.
Good.
And he was sleeping in the house and they could hear him snoring at the same time that they could see this apparition.
Oh my word.
Yes. When they spoke to him, he thought that it was his father, so her boyfriend's grandfather.
Oh, so I'm guessing there's a very strong familial similarity there.
Definitely. It's quite funny, actually. I used to go to school with somebody and I saw a photo of him as a child and it was the spitting image of his child. It's just incredible. Like, you wouldn't believe the similarity.
That's
it's obviously
really interesting then. So possibly not a doppelganger of the father or some sort of projection, but actually the spirit of the grandfather.
Indeed.
And what is it about 3 a.m?
Yeah, it's weird. Everything seems to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. What's going on?
I don't know, but it's something I've experienced and you've experienced, and only in particular situations. So there is something to that. I just don't know what.
And what was the deal with the red glow? That's a new one on me.
That's not something I've heard of before either. Very interesting.
And thank you to everyone that sent in stories for this episode. If you've got a paranormal story to share, please do get in touch with us at notonceVS.com.
It's your true ghost stories that make this show, and we couldn't do it without you.
And now on to the paranormal postcard.
And this episode, we make a return to Leicestershire. Whilst we were doing research for our previous episode on the Battle of Bosworth, we came across some pretty interesting history and legends about Richard III, tales of murder and treasure, and an EVP captured in a 700-year-old manor that made news headlines. This postcard has been rather a long time in the making and seemed at times doomed never to see the light of day, but we are now pleased to finally bring you a paranormal postcard from Donington le Heath manor.
When Shakespeare penned his play Richard III, he was inspired by the very real dramas and bloody battles of the Wars of the Roses. In the play, he depicts Richard of York encamped on Bosworth Field the night before the fatal battle that ended his life. As King Richard sleeps, he is visited by the ghosts of all the souls whose lives he has taken. One by one, they appear to haunt his dreams and to rack his conscience. One by one, the apparitions remind him of his every foul and murderous deed and utter a curse upon him, despair and die. Whether or not Richard really spent his last night despairing over his misdeeds, and whether he was truly as wicked as Shakespeare would have us believe, is open to speculation. But sure enough, by the end of the Battle of Bosworth, Richard III was indeed dead, and the reign of the Tudors in England had begun. Richard, or the Duke of York, was a very short-lived monarch in both senses. He reigned for only 2 years and lived only to the age of 32. He's widely painted as a villain in the historical record, not helped by Shakespeare's depiction, no doubt, but also because he's credited for murdering the princes in the Tower. Richard was in fact only uncle to the true heir of the English throne, his 12-year-old nephew Edward. Richard was appointed protector of the boy and his 9-year-old brother, both of whom he lodged in the Tower of London after their father's death. But the boys mysteriously disappeared from the tower, and Richard claimed the crown for himself. Perhaps it's no wonder then that Shakespeare envisaged the Duke of York to be paraded by the ghosts of his victims on the night before his final fateful battle. But legend loves a villain, and myth and mystery surrounding the last days of the king have abounded for centuries and are rife within local folklore. One such legend tells that as Richard rode out towards Bosworth, crossing Leicester's Bow Bridge, the spur of his boot struck the bridge's parapet. A local wise woman reportedly predicted his defeat and death by shouting out that where his spur had struck the bridge that day, his lifeless head would strike the same spot on his return. 2 days later, Richard's dead body was in fact to return by the same route, his maimed body slung over a horse, his limp head dangling and striking the bridge's parapet just as foretold. He certainly doesn't seem to have been popular from the way he was buried, stuffed in a crudely cut grave which was too small, and with no shroud or coffin. After the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, the site of his tomb in a demolished friary was forgotten, and his body was lost, until a huge archaeological project in 2012 finally located his remains under a car park in Leicester city centre. After thorough examination and DNA testing confirmed that he was, beyond a reasonable doubt, the 15th century king, he was reinterred in Leicester Cathedral and, in an odd twist of fate, the funeral procession took Richard's body back over Bow Bridge one more time. Unlike Shakespeare's version, the doomed monarch spent his time before the Battle of Bosworth resting at an inn. Records show that he and his officers lodged at the Blue Boar in Leicester, a grand timber-framed building used by wealthy merchants and aristocracy. There is an odd legend that Richard disliked sleeping in strange beds, and that, as such, he brought his own bed down from Nottingham to the Leicester Inn. And so confident of his victory in the battle, he simply left it there to await his return. Of course, he never did return alive, and so the ornately carved wooden bedstead was abandoned at the inn. The curious circumstance of this bedstead was to spawn tales of treasure, inspire a murder, and lead us, in a roundabout way, to the ghosts of Donington le Heath Manor. The legend of Richard III's bedstead was first written down in the middle of the 17th century by Sir Roger Twisden in his Commonplace book, and tells this tale.
When King Richard III marched into Leicester against Henry, Earl of Richmond, he lay at the Blue Boar Inn in the town of Leicester, where was left a large wooden bedstead, gilded in some places, which after his defeat and death in the Battle of Bosworth was left, either through haste or as a thing of little value, to the people of the house. Henceforth, this old bedstead, which was boarded at the bottom, became a piece of standing furniture and passed from tenant to tenant with the inn. In the reign of Queen Elizabeth, this house was kept by one Mr. Clark, who put a bed on this bedstead, which his wife, going to make hastily and jumbling the bedstead, a piece of gold dropped out. This excited the woman's curiosity. She narrowly examined this antiquated piece of furniture, and finding it had a double bottom, took off the uppermost with a chisel, upon which she discovered the place between them filled with gold, part of it coined by Richard III, and the rest of it in earlier times. Mr. Clark, her husband, concealed this piece of good fortune, though by degrees the effects of it became known, for he became rich from a low condition, and, in the space of a few years, mayor of the town. And then the story of the bedstead came to be rumoured by the servants. At this death, he left his estate to his wife, who still continued to keep the inn, though she was known to be very rich, which put some wicked persons upon engaging the maidservant to assist in robbing her. These folks, to the number of 7, lodged in the house, plundered it, and carried off some horseloads of valuable things, and yet left a considerable number of valuables scattered about the floor. As for Mrs. Clark herself, she endeavoured to cry out for help, upon which her maid thrust her fingers down her throat and choked her, for which fact she was burnt, and the 7 men who were her accomplices were hanged at Leicester.
After the murder of Mrs. Agnes Clark, lodgers at the Blue Boar began to report catching glimpses of a white apparition silently gliding about the inn. Many people assumed this to be the ghostly shade of the murdered woman, and sightings of her continued until the Blue Boar was demolished in 1836. As for the bed itself, the murder trial had made it rather infamous, and it was put on display for tourists. In 1611, it was included on a sightseeing list of English exhibitions which could be viewed for 1 penny. In later years, it was sold on and resided at various properties around the area, variously altered to fit its new residences better until hardly any of the original remained. Eventually, it was purchased by Leicestershire Museum Service, who used it to furnish a historic house near Colville in Leicestershire. Which brings us, in a roundabout way, to the ghosts of Donington le Heath Manor.
One of the oldest houses in Leicestershire, Donington le Heath was originally built around the year 1290. From the 15th century onwards, it was owned by an old gentry family from the Midlands called the Digbys, and the house was passed between family members for many years. Around the year 1618, the Digbys set about modernising the medieval manor, and it's this period in the house's life which has been recreated by the Leicestershire Museum Service for us to experience today. As such, these days it's billed as the 1620s house and garden, and the recreation of the house in its 17th century detail is quite immersive. Even before you enter the house, there's so much to explore in the gardens. A working kitchen garden has been established, just as would have provided the house with vegetables in its 1620 heyday. Further on, there are herb gardens packed with fascinating plants with evocative names, sneezewort being amongst my favourites, which would have been used for cooking, medicine, and even making fabric dyes. At the back of the house, for the adventurous types, is an ornamental maze. It's a warm, quiet day when we visit, and the house is still and cool inside. There's been a lot of effort put into showing the manor as a home rather than as a dusty museum piece, and it's very effective. Downstairs in the scullery, fresh flowers adorn the windowsills, and food is laid out on the tables. In the cool, dark dairy, pats of butter chill, and bowls are draped with muslin to keep out wayward insects. A fire appears to crackle in the huge kitchen hearth, which is so big Fitz and I could both sit comfortably inside it. Pots hang on chains above the licking flames, and a birch broom is propped against the fireplace. Everywhere you look, little details tell the story of everyday 17th century life, including a witch bottle tucked into a cubbyhole in the stonework of the wall. With no sounds of 21st century life intruding, you could be forgiven for thinking that the Digby family of 1620 had just stepped out for a time. Ultimately, we did stumble into the presence of people, but that did nothing to break the spell, as the guides were adorned in 17th century garb themselves. As was typical for houses of this age, the family's main entrance would have been on the first floor, accessed by an outside staircase. Although this original entrance is no longer used, upstairs in the lobby, 17th century coats and hats still hang by the front door, as though waiting for the master of the house to don them once more. Slightly more sinisterly, a vicious-looking halberd is casually propped in a corner of the room. At one end of the house is a private study. Tucked away, it can only be accessed by passing through one of the bedrooms. It's set out with parchments and quills, but an odd-shaped window hints at a more secretive purpose. The window is of a trefoil design, the Christian representation of the Father, Son and Holy Ghost, may indicate that this room was once used as a chapel. This wouldn't have been unusual in a house of this age, but by the 1620s, Catholic Mass had been made illegal. The Digby family apparently retained their Catholic faith during this very dangerous time, and any priest caught leading the illegal service in the Digby's secret chapel would have been executed. The bedroom that keeps this hidden study screened from the outside world is in fact the bedroom containing the infamous King Richard bed. As the literature points out, the bed itself has been so repaired and upgraded over the years that nearly all the visible parts date to a much later time than King Richard's era. And yet, there is something about it. We both experience an electrical tingle entering the bedroom doorway, although whether this is to do with the bed or the room itself is unclear. I want to believe that this is the bed of legend, despite the various theories and controversies around its true origin. And just to add to the mystery, there's a certain EVP caught by paranormal investigators which only adds to the intrigue. In 2013, the Haunted Heritage team were trying to make contact using a spirit box, a device which rapidly scans through radio frequencies to create white noise. The idea being that spirits may be able to use this white noise to speak through. When asked, "What is your name?" the team received a clear reply. A man's voice answering, "Richard." They didn't release their evidence at once, though. At the time, the discovery of King Richard's body in a Leicester car park was all over the news, and understandably, they didn't want their evidence to be written off as simply cashing in on the story. After waiting for the excitement to die down, they came forward with what they'd discovered, although the press still quickly picked it up and sensationalised the link to Richard III, even misquoting the historical facts around the house's connection to the king, much to the team's dismay. In fact, the Haunted Heritage team, who now run public investigations at Donington le Heath as well as other sites, are very much focused on the history as well as the hauntings, and one founding member has a background in museums. They, their team members and guests have had many paranormal experiences at Donington le Heath, and it seems as though the manor house has plenty of its own ghosts to go around, even without the infamous bed. Phantom monks have been witnessed by many guests. The ghostly shade of a housemaid has been seen flitting about the property, and a shadowy figure in 17th century dress and a tall, brimmed hat has been spotted, some being of the opinion that it might be the shade of Sir Everard Digby himself. We were very lucky to be able to catch up for a coffee and a chat with Gill and Michelle, founding members of Haunted Heritage, so they could tell us their side of the story regarding the EVP and all about their experiences in the house, including a particularly frightening encounter on the stairs.
And thank you again to Gill and Michelle from Haunted Heritage for taking the time to speak to us, especially because we had initially planned to do the interview via Skype. We had some technical difficulties, and literally at the last minute, I had to phone Gill and go, "I'm awfully sorry, our computer stopped working. Is there any way we can do this another way?"
Yes, the ladies very, very graciously agreed to meet us in person. We hopped in the coffee-mobile, whizzed up to Leicester, and did our first interview in the coffee-mobile. We haven't quite got the setup perfect yet, so apologies if you can hear a little bit of traffic noise in the background, but we had an absolutely fascinating time talking to Gill and Michelle, and we do hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so we are here with Gill and Michelle from Haunted Heritage, and to start off with, our listeners might not be familiar with you, so if you can tell us a little about Haunted Heritage and what you do and some of your locations and what people can expect if they come out on one of your events.
Right, okay, yeah, as you said, we are Haunted Heritage, but we are based within Leicestershire. So we have a lot of venues in and around the Leicestershire and the Midlands.
Yeah, we specialise in mainly museums. We didn't go down that specialism route, just kind of fell into it. And a lot of these museums wouldn't allow any other companies in, so it's been fantastic for us. We've been going since 2011, and we just keep growing and growing and growing. We now do historical ghost walks and ghost hunts and talks, and it's all about heritage. We just love our heritage, and we love haunted places and ghosts.
And ghosts.
Well, that sounds amazing. That sounds right up our alley. We are all about the ghosts and the history and the heritage. So what inspired you to set up the company?
Well, when we met, with myself being a medium and Michelle being the historian, and both shared a passion of haunted places. So having had the opportunity to work in some local areas within where we both lived, and that's how it started, we just grabbed it with both hands and gave it a run.
Absolutely. I actually worked in a museum, and so that was a starting point. So we started doing a few ghost hunts there. I think we did 8 in the first year, and then it grew, and then it grew, and then we kind of broadened out to some other venues and introduced some ghost walks. And then it got bigger, went to another venue, did some more ghosts, and then literally by the end of the first 2 years, we're doing about 20 odd events a year, weren't we? In different locations and different setups. And then we decided to, go solo and make it into a proper business. So, bosh, that's what we did.
Fantastic. That sounds so exciting. We have to ask all of our guests this, of course. How did you get interested in the paranormal to begin with?
I think for myself, being a medium, and I do lots of other things. I do Reiki, I do crystal and things like that. But my interest is the paranormal. And I think having seen spirits from an early age, I just wanted to push it really, and especially in historical places. I wanted to know the ancestral people. Could I pick up on those? And, when you start going into haunted locations, for me as a medium, the things that I was picking up, and it's always the not knowing. So if I could pick something up and then pass it over to Michelle, who would then do the research, to know that what I'm picking up is factual or things that wasn't in the public domain, to me, just absolutely brilliant. So it was from being a medium and just really getting stuck into haunted locations. It's just amazing. And we're both passionate about that.
Oh, it must be mind-blowing when you make those connections to what you're picking up and the factual basis behind it with the research. That must be just incredible.
No, it is. And the fact that Michelle does all this research and to come back and to confirm what I've picked up.
You're never going to guess what I found out.
Yeah.
Jill.
It's just absolutely mind-blowing. And to me, it does never actually, I'd never get bored of doing it. And the fact is that we can come together with facts. It's just amazing. No, it is absolutely amazing. I love it when she comes back and says, "This is what I found out."
And what we're finding, which is really bizarre, is that we can be at one venue and something will happen, go and research it, and then that connects to another venue that we go to and connects to another venue. I mean, it really is bizarre, and it seems to keep coming back to the same period in time and same
You're
people
finding
in
layers
time.
and layers of intrigue there.
Yeah, but as Michelle is saying, you do one venue, and whatever you pick up from the medium point of view or spirits that we've made contact with, and then you go to another venue and there's a link back.
There'll be a character, there'll be someone in
There'll be
history,
somebody,
an ancestor who's got a link to another venue.
So that is, we just get wowed by that constantly, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it seems to follow, that was kind of how we came across Donington le Heath, because we'd gone to Bosworth, and then that led us to Donington le Heath, and then, Donington le Heath then led us to seeking you out because of what you'd found there.
Yeah, you find these random connections, don't you?
Well, Donington le Heath is a firm favourite with us. We have exclusivity to that. So it's nice that no other paranormal investigators go in there. And again, it never disappoints. There is always something new, or we've managed to pick even the littlest thing up of things that have happened there. And the new one that's come to light is the witch and the witch trials of Leicester, and there are links back to Donington le Heath. Now, who'd have believed that?
Well, obviously we've been telling the listeners a bit about the history of Donington le Heath, but perhaps you guys can fill us in more about the ghosts and the legends, and maybe some of the bits of history we don't know about.
Go on, you start.
All right, okay. Wow, obviously, built between something to 1240, 1290 by the Le Heath family. It's been passed from pillar to post to different families. The Diggoby family being the most famous ones. Actually, they're there for about 600 years. They were there for. And then after that, it was kind of like tenanted out to quite a few farmers. So the house has been many different people there. Loads of people called Thomas have lived there. It's just research, it doesn't make my life
find that a lot of history.
Yeah. But the actual house has been changed and around a lot as well. It started off originally back in the 1200s with the actual land. It was gifted by the actual Priory of Ulverscroft. And we do believe there's some kind of hermitage there to start off with.
Right.
And there are monks. And I know I have this whole thing about everyone thinks a ghost is a monk, but people with these are actual monks, not just people in pointy hats and cloaks and all the rest of it.
To be honest, the very first time we went there and did a recce, not knowing much history about this at all, and we went into the barn area, and I could actually see a monk hanging.
Really?
From there. And of course, at that point in time, we didn't know anything about this at all.
No, and I have to say, having done a reasonable amount of research on the house myself, that's not something I knew about at all. So you must have to dig quite deeply.
We did.
To find that information.
Michelle did.
Yeah.
I'd not come
Definitely.
across it at all.
Yeah.
And myself being a medium picked that up, but we've had other mediums come and join our group, and we had one other medium that picked up on exactly the same place where this monk was hanging.
This is a separate story, but it's worth the telling. So I used to work at Donington le Heath, and I went into the tea room the next day, and there's a young girl there. She says, "Oh, how did the event go last night?" So, "Oh, fine." Some more people saw the monk hanging there.
Really?
And
So there are actually sightings of it.
Yeah, and anyway, she never went back to work there. Oops. Yeah.
So are sightings of the monk quite common?
Well, not necessarily of that monk, but that's actually in the tea room, which was the barn, which was built on a previous barn.
Right.
But in the actual house, because of the Diggorbys, they were a Catholic family.
Yeah.
They do believe there was actually a private prayer area set aside, and people often picked up. They would say "man of the cloth," so monk, man of the cloth. People need a bit more research about different types of history to help me out here. So that has been cited quite a few times, and you've picked up on that, haven't you?
Yeah.
But it's like an encyclopedia. You just don't know what page you're going to be opening up onto. It's not all ghosts are medieval or, from the Dark Ages. It could be absolutely anything. We've had Victorian ladies have been witnessed, children, maids, masters of the house, lords of the land. We've had lots of things kicking off.
I mean, one of our strap lines is what lies beneath.
Yeah. And I think with Donington le Heath, obviously, there's that temptation there because it's been restored in the 17th century version of the house. Of course, there's going to be that temptation to think that any apparitions you see there are going to be from the 1600s, and of course they're not going to be. I mean, the house is still standing after being built in 1290 or thereabouts. It could be any period of history that you're encountering there.
But the one that's always surprised me, and that is up until the 1960s, it was actually used as a pig farm, and the pigs lived inside the house. Never seen a ghost of a pig, though, have we?
No, we haven't.
No.
But it's got great links. It's on just out of Standard Hill. It's just down the road from Bosworth Battlefield. And it would have been a larger area. But the houses are quite close to it now. But it would have been part of their land. So even some of the hauntings that are going on in the gardens area, they're not necessarily to do with the immediate family. It could be from the locals.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because one of the places we felt a particular vibe as soon as we came into the grounds of the house was actually outside, not in the house at all. It was at a corner of the lawn, in fact, and it was ever so strange. It was just on a bit of path at the edge of the lawn, and it was almost like you were walking into a puddle of static electricity, and we both felt it really strongly. And I don't know whether you've had other people have any experiences in that area.
We've had lots of sightings in the gardens, haven't
Yeah.
we? And even if we do get some nice weather, we do send on our ghost investigations. We do send teams out there to see if they can pick anything up, which has been quite interesting.
It was like there was a point sort of in the garden that was just, it was full of static, and it made the hair on the back of my arm stand up, and you pushed into it and you got to the middle of it, and it was literally like there was a sort of a dense ball of something, and when you got to the very centre, there's certainly a feeling I get when I'm at places that are supposedly haunted in a lot of cases. And
in fact, the other place we had that at Donington le Heath was near the infamous bed, not the infamous bed itself, but it was in the doorway between two rooms, sort of near where the bed was. So again, I don't know whether that ties in with anything you know about sightings in the house.
It makes sense in what you're saying, because as you mentioned earlier, the house has been redressed, and the area that you've mentioned was actually one room. And that's where we had our experience with the most famous EVP that we captured, calling out to spirit. And we'd been there all night. It was towards the latter part of the evening, and we'd just done a seance, calling out, and very clearly we got through a piece of equipment called a ghost box.
Yep.
And it said, when asked who it was, what was your name, it came back very clearly, Richard. And on the original recording that we still have with that, you can quite clearly hear a very low frequency that it was trying to say Richard on 2 occasions before.
So in total, Richard was said 3 times?
Absolutely. Yes,
so
it
that's
was.
What's
the chances of that?
Exactly.
I think we only had about 12 guests there that night, and it was witnessed by everybody that was there. So it was mind-blowing.
That is incredible. I have heard the EVP, although I would like to hear it again. Now that I know that there was the other 2 times when it was trying to say Richard, we'll have to have another listen to that, because that's really interesting.
Yep.
Do you get many EVPs recorded in the house?
Oh, that's a good question.
We've had a couple more from there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything. There's nothing as quality as that.
That was particularly clear.
I think it's just more strange phenomena. You've got to chase up the stairs, haven't you? The stairs in Donington aren't actually part of the original building. They've been brought from another building. They thought at one point in Wigston House, which is in Jubilee Square, kind of in Leicester, but then it might be another building. No one's too sure, but they're not haunted
the
stairs,
original
they are.
to the house. And we have had many, and I'm saying many experiences on
so do you
those
think
stairs.
those stairs might have come with something
Well, you see-
themselves?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Baggage.
Baggage.
Yeah, we call it baggage. Everything retains energy.
Yeah.
Residual energy. So if the stairs have been bought from wherever and used as part of the, access to a lower level to an upper level, which they are and there. But we've had quite a few. But for me, people say to me, as a medium and as a ghost hunter, do you ever get scared? Not very often. And I say that really quite strongly. It's not very often, because when you open yourself up and you're doing these investigations, you are waiting for something to happen. So you're prepared.
Yeah.
So when things do happen, it doesn't really come back and, jump or you run. However, I did run on this one occasion.
Really?
And it was towards the end of the night. And we allow guests to do their own free time. And Michelle and I was with 3 other guests up in the top room where you mentioned earlier, and was doing a calling out session, and I said to Michelle very quietly, I said, I'm going to take some equipment back and I need to go to the ladies' room. So picks up some equipment, comes down the stairs, outside, crossed to the barn, used the ladies' toilet, took the equipment back and started to come back. Approaches the stairs, bearing in mind everywhere is still pitch black, and I'm using a hand torch, and started to go up the stairs, and they twist 3 times. So I started to come up the 2nd level, and as I did so, I could clearly hear, very clearly, somebody walking behind me. So I ran up quickly the last level, and you can overlook from the top down, thinking it was one of my colleagues. And I was about to say, well, you got me then, when there was nobody there. But it gets worse than that, because I could still clearly hear the footsteps continuing up.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. It did freak me out.
I'm not surprised.
It did freak me out. Yeah, it did freak me out. And Michelle was in there like, oh, my life, you've just never...
All I heard is this, and I heard this. Oh, you got me, you bugger.
I would have done the same thing.
Yeah. So it did, but the stairs are just, we've caught loads of stuff.
Yeah.
So I was surprised you didn't pick something up on that.
But also in the big hall, it's On two occasions, I've been chased by the table. Unfortunately, the first occasion, I was actually sat on the carpet at the time, wasn't I? On the table, they're doing a table tipping session, and all of a sudden, the table was on two of the legs of the four, and just came straight down the room towards me. A bit like Daleks, it wasn't very good on carpet, and stopped. But I put my foot out to stop it anyway. But that was a bit daunting.
That was a bit scary.
Yeah.
But no, we're one or two.
But you don't tend to think, I mean, I didn't get any sort of negative or oppressive or heavy energy there particularly.
No, it's an absolute phenomenal place. Love it.
Yeah, I found it had a lovely atmosphere, to be honest.
Yeah, and like I said, it never disappoints. And what lies beneath, because we never know, each time we go, we actually have a conversation outside, wonder what tonight will happen. Because that's how it is.
Yeah.
Must be an amazing location.
Yeah, well, it is.
Is that one of your favourites, do you think? Or do you have a favourite location?
It is.
Well, it has to be a favourite, doesn't it?
It has to be, you know. I mean, we have some amazing things that happen at different places, and again, locally to where we are. I mean, Bow Manor Hall's
Cracking,
a good one as well. But Donington is it's up there. I think mainly because of the EVP that we experienced and personal experiences, not just to Michelle and myself, but to even guests. You know, they love it, and we get regular coming back each time we go to Donington.
I mean, Bow Manor is just down the road from us, well, ish kind of thing. And that's a beautiful building, and that's got great connections. You wouldn't believe it, but that's got connection to Bradgate Park, another place we go to, through Lady Jane Grey. Her mother moved there when Jane was executed. Moved in with Adrian Stokes, her very dashing groom. Yeah. Anyway, so then the house was rebuilt. And then was actually, they've got links to the Herrick family. Well, one half of the Herrick family are poets. The other half of the Herrick family had connections with finding Richard III's body and in his garden and all the rest of it. See these connections again keep happening?
All through the county.
And then with Bow Manor Hall during the Second World War, it was actually commissioned by the military and used as a training centre to send people, basically train them as spies and shoot them into Europe, which is quite sad. And then it became a listening station, so it got a connection to Bletchley Park. And it was Bow Manor Hall that first heard about the mass migration of people across Europe. And it was the movement of the Jews. And they also heard when the dam busters first dropped all their bombs on the dams, and were flying back, they were the first ones to hear the call signs. And my connection there is I've got ancestors who actually were the dam busters.
Really?
So, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, the connection that comes around, so it's great, And also Bradgate, we love Bradgate Park.
We love Bradgate Park, we do
it.
ghost walks there, and Bradgate in itself is a beautiful place, even by day. But you go back at night and it's a totally different atmosphere.
Really?
And we go into the ruins, and again, that is something else that just keeps throwing up different things. And it's not just the home of Lady Jane Grey. You know, she was the forgotten queen. Why? She was our queen. Leicestershire. We had a queen, and she was the 9-day queen, and very much forgotten, but not on our ghost walks.
Not on our ghost walks. And her sister Catherine, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Brilliant story, but that's for another day. And another ghost walk is obviously Bosworth.
I was just going to bring that up because obviously our listeners do know a bit about Bosworth. We did an episode on it recently. So what kind of experiences have you had there? Is that quite an active location?
Oh, yes.
Great.
It's the photographs more than anything else.
Really?
Isn't it? Yeah. We mentioned this last Sue earlier on, this piece of equipment that's been made for us. And the actual guy who created it was walking on with a guest on a test night. And this guy's got his headphones on the little box. And Graham's walking alongside and this guy starts shouting, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" And everyone looks around. And he says, "I've just heard the horn, a battle horn."
Really?
And he then spent that night on the internet trying to find a similar sound and sent it to us saying, "This is what I heard."
We had something weird while we were there, didn't we?
Yeah.
It was ever so odd because we went, we were driving back from somewhere else. So it was after closing time. Everybody had gone home. We were just about the only people there. And just out of nowhere, we heard this noise.
Yeah, it reminded me of sort of powder muskets and cannons.
Yeah.
Not the main charge,
Yeah.
but the sort of frizzen pan.
Yeah.
When you get that little before the main charge goes. It was really
We just
strange.
couldn't. We went all around, didn't we, trying to find where it had come from, but there just wasn't anything. It was really strange.
Wow. At Bosworth, obviously, the farmhouse, which actually uses the Heritage Centre, they always thought that the actual battle took place on Captain Wing's land. And then a few years ago, they did the Heritage Lottery Fund and developed it all, did research on the other land, and that's when they found the largest find of cannonball in Northern Europe. And obviously, but the cannonball had been quite simple and basic at that time. So it's just interesting. You just tap into these layers, don't you?
Yeah.
It's great.
But again, we have to say what lies beneath, because we do it as a Bosworth battlefield ghost walk, but there are so many things that's been happened there. I mean, there was a murder, there was a body found.
Really?
Oh yeah.
The Romans were there as well.
The Romans were there. There was a plane crashed over there.
Plague Village.
Yeah. So there are so many things.
So much more than just the battlefield. Then.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So
And down the station as well.
yeah, and we go down to
Cracking into it,
Shelter Station and we do some things down there. So it's lovely walk.
I never like walking back through the woods though.
No.
I always get sent ahead to go and put the kettle on. don't like
Very
that at
important
all.
duty.
Yeah.
But no, Ambient Woods, they are really quite scary.
Really?
Yeah.
Might have to go for a little walk through there.
Yeah.
Put it
Good
on
luck.
our list.
Yeah.
So, actually, that's a good question. If you were going to recommend us, obviously we've been to some places in Leicester, but if you were going to pick one that we absolutely had to visit, what would you say?
Well, you've been to Donington le
Been to
Heath?
Donington.
Been to Donington le Heath.
But Bow Manor's
in
got to be
Bosworth.
up there because it is
It's got
cracking,
to be
isn't
up there.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Bow Manor.
cracking.
But I know you like to visit places in the day, but you would not have access to the places that we have on a paranormal night.
No.
So you have to come on one of our paranormal
I think we will.
events.
I think we will. For
Because
sure.
we have behind door access to attics and cellars, and they're huge.
All the best places.
Absolutely.
In fact, just not far from you, Kelmarsh Hall. Yeah.
Yeah,
We go
going
there.
there.
Got access for 12 months. Yes.
brilliant.
So, and
That's
it's
going on the list.
never been done before. Cracking. And when we did the wreckage, bright sunshine, got a little summer frocks on, hadn't we?
Yeah.
Oh, and what we're picking up was amazing.
Really?
Yeah. Brilliant.
I love those sorts of places.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we've got some really exciting things coming
Oh, we
on.
have. Yeah, really exciting. In fact, we're going to Leicester Castle soon.
Oh, brilliant.
That's part of a new project. We've been contacted by De Montfort University.
Yeah.
They actually run part-run the Heritage Open Days in Leicester. And they contacted us a few months ago wanting to,
Absolutely, yeah.
can we work in partnership with them to give their Heritage Days an extra zhuzh. So Heritage Days and Haunted Heritage, match made in heaven, really,
That's
isn't
fun.
it?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So we're going to be giving a talk at the Heritage Centre. Here's another connection. So we're giving this talk at the Heritage Centre, which is in the Hawthorne building, part of De Montfort University, which has the remaining arches of the Church of the Annunciation, where Richard III's body was taken from Bosworth and taken into Leicester and put in the crypt. And that's where we're doing our talk about what is a ghost.
And when is this
Connections.
talk? This sounds interesting.
It's 5th of October, I do
5th
believe.
of October.
Coming up shortly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and then they're also allowing us to go into Leicester Castle, which hasn't been investigated before.
And you
Yeah.
can't often get into it anyway.
I know. So yeah, then the
Got
cellars.
some really,
Brilliant. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that one. So that was just a cracking one, wasn't it? And then tomorrow we're actually going to be in contact with some other people, haven't we, in Derbyshire to go and do some work with those.
probably doing a ghost walk incorporated on a steam train.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
That's exciting.
Yeah, so they know they've got ghosts, they know they've got an area of one of the stations and they want us to go and do that, but they don't want theatrical, they want
No,
proper
proper
historical
how
ghost
we
stuff.
like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're going to go there tomorrow, aren't we?
Yeah, to see that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's just going crazy for us at the moment, isn't it? It just seems to be
It's-
one thing after another.
Yeah.
And we've been shortlisted for these tourism awards as well. So,
that's
so that's
brilliant.
fantastic, isn't it? So there's not many ghost companies out there who do the heritage, do the tourism. We've got one king, one queen. Technically, we're going to claim Elizabeth I's ours because she went to Bradgate Park. And if I follow up this witch information about the biggest witch slaughter, shall we just say, in 1616 in Leicester, I'm going to throw in there James I as well. So there we are.
So you've got lots of exciting projects in the
Oh,
pipeline.
it's been fantastic. Yeah, they've got loads of things coming up.
So how can our listeners keep up with everything you've got going on and find you and find tickets to the talk you've got coming up in Leicester and events, especially if they want to come and investigate Donington le Heath for themselves?
Absolutely. Donington le Heath, actually, our next point there is Halloween weekend.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we do have a few tickets left. In fact, also for Bow Manor
Manor as
Hall.
well.
So
Yeah.
we're doing the 2 events on one night.
We're doing Bosworth on the 30th of October.
Yes. Bosworth Ghost Walk.
Bradgate sold out months and months ago.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
the 2 venues for events is Donington le Heath and Bow Manor Hall. And
And
so
leading up to that is it's the Talk and the Leicester Castle.
Talk and Leicester Castle.
Yeah.
A few tickets left for that.
yeah.
But where can you find us? We have a superb website, and it's called hauntedheritage.co.uk. All our events are on there, including ghost walks, ghost talks, paranormal events. You can drop us an email at hauntedheritage@outlook.com, and we get back to you straight away.
Got a very chatty Facebook page as well. So come and join the gang. Yes, come meet the team and
Yeah.
talk to us.
Yeah,
talk to us and we'll
absolutely. Yeah.
happily talk back.
We are a friendly bunch of people. That is important to us. It is all about customer experience. And that was one thing that we was key about when we first joined up as a business. You know, myself had paid good money to go on a paranormal event and felt excluded, to be honest.
Yeah.
So when we decided to join ranks and get together, we said, you know, it's the customer's experience. Yes, we're doing something that we're passionate about, but we want them to experience as much as we possibly can, and by that we look after them.
Absolutely. And they've got to leave one of our venues after learning something brand new about that venue.
Yes.
And most people are quite passionate, aren't they, about
Absolutely.
it?
So-
Yeah. And we're not the scary ghost hunters. We don't do dark tourism. You know, heritage is what we do, and we deliver our events very, very well. And we just have a nice following. It's great.
And we love that idea of having that focus on history
Absolutely.
as well as the paranormal.
Yeah. All the 2 together. What do you got?
Perfect combination.
Perfect combination.
We always said that everyone's got a ghost story.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
yours?
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely.
That's
I love
so
that
true.
tagline. I think we need to steal that.
I find that the people that say they don't believe in ghosts have the best ghost stories.
They
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't believe in all that nonsense, but
But you're right. It's like we say, everybody's got a ghost story. Whether they believe it or not, somebody out there will tell me, well, this happened to me. And this happened to me.
Yeah.
Couldn't
But,
agree more.
We had a ghost walk a few months ago at Bradgate, and there was a family walking along, and at the end of it, the chap comes up to me, the dad of the family. He says, "I really enjoyed that." He says, a bit sceptical. He says, "And when we were in that chapel," he says, "I turned around to my daughter and said, I loved the way they went to the stage door, that sound and that talking." And she went, "What sound and what talking?"
Yeah.
Wow.
Excellent. Couldn't write it, could you?
Perfect. I think it sounds like we really need to get ourselves on one of these evenings.
we certainly do.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. It has been an absolute pleasure.
You're
Well,
welcome.
thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Thank you both.
Before we got stuck into the interview, we sat down with Gill and Michelle over a coffee and covered quite a few topics that we didn't get the chance to go into detail during the interview. One of the things we talked about was the history they'd uncovered on a terrible series of witch trials that took place in Leicestershire in the 1600s. Interestingly, during our research, we came across a paper discussing some scorch marks made by burning tapers in a particular way to mark the wooden beams and lintels of Donington le Heath. Some appear to have been made to the wooden beams prior to construction, and others once the house had been completed. What is interesting is that they appear to have been focused on the doors, windows and thresholds, mainly around the bedrooms, and it's believed that they were put there to protect against malevolent occult forces.
I think it's just like what Gill and Michelle were saying to us. The more time you spend looking into Donington le Heath, the more fascinating layers and upon layers of history and intrigue you end up uncovering.
And it certainly has some amazing woodworking for things to crawl out of.
Yes.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this episode. We hope you enjoyed hearing about our experiences at Donington le Heath. Thank you again to everyone that shared stories with us. And if you've got a story to share, especially if you're a gentleman, please do get in touch at knockoncevs.com.
If you are able to support the show financially, we truly appreciate it, and you can do so through either Patreon or simply by making a one-off donation for the price of a cup of coffee through the platform Ko-fi, Ko-fi.
And you can also find the links to both of those on our website.
If you can't support us financially, we completely understand, but there are lots of other ways you can support our show. You can rate and review us, and most importantly of all, you can share us with your friends.
Well, that's it from us, and we hope you'll join us next month for our second Hello Birthday Ween.
EVP 4